Friends, this is America Sheriff David Clark, and I'm happy to announce that Straight Talk has partnered with Blue Line Roasting Company to bring you delicious coffee to enjoy while you listen to this podcast. Blue Line Roasting Company also serves our first responders by giving a portion of all net proceeds to numerous organizations who support them. Order today at BlueLineRoasting.com, and don't forget, when you join the Straight Shooter VIP Club, you'll receive a free coffee sample and mug, plus invitations to private podcast events.
I have often said, you want to reduce the likelihood of police fatal use of force? Stop trying to fix the police and fix the ghetto. Welcome to the Straight Talk podcast. I'm your moderator and your host, America Sheriff, former Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark. Thanks for tuning in. Folks, there's a crisis in this country right now, and it's been going on for about the last 3 decades, and it can't grab headlines. I guess it's not sexy enough. There's no hair on fire rhetoric that can be used, no breaking news stories. Politicians don't run on it either at the state or the federal level. But I think it's one of the most devastating things that we can do to the future of this country and how we're not meeting the needs of generations of kids. And that crisis in the United States that I'm referring to is a crisis in education. Specifically, public K-12, but all of K-12, really. And it's probably worse in the urban schools, the urban centers. But any of you who live in suburban areas to think that you're immune from this, you're kidding yourself. Because if you really looked at scores, test scores, you'll find out that even in those suburban schools, they're underperforming. They're not reaching that standard of excellence, which is what I look for in anything. Not perfection, excellence. And I'm going to unpack this for you so that you can see and you can hear what's really going on in our K-12 public schools in the United States of America. No, it doesn't have anything to do with critical race theory and transgenderism. I'm talking about academic achievement. Whether our kids are learning. I've been talking about this easily for the last 20 years. I've written op-eds on it. I've talked about it incessantly when I guest host talk radio shows, some national ones. But it can't seem to catch people's imagination. Like I said, I guess it's not sexy enough. You know, I dealt with, and as the sheriff of Milwaukee County, a lot of the criminality I can pinpoint to the failure of our K-12 public education system. Because kids who do well in school are less likely to be involved in crime. And I used to get asked all the time, you know, what do we do to reduce crime? And I'd always say, fix the schools. I'm talking about the K-12 education, public, urban. Fix the schools. And, you know, I get asked, you know, how do we reduce poverty in America? Fix the schools. Education is the traditional vehicle to upward mobility in the United States of America. It always has been, and it always will be. There's an opportunity. If you educate yourself, if you go as far as you can in school, you have opportunities to jump from one socioeconomic category to another. In other words, you can start out in the lower class, poverty-stricken, poverty-ridden, and jump to the middle class with a decent education. You can go from the middle class to the upper middle class through education. So I come across this article, and this is what made me want to talk about this again. First time on my podcast, but you'll hear from me about it again. And again, and again, and again. Until people start to get it within your local communities. Forget about the national level. First of all, I think we should do away with the United States Department of Education. Schools are local issues. There's a state, each state has a vested interest in educating their kids, educating their residents, their population. I also think they ought to get rid of schools of education. But that's a topic for another day. So I come across this article from the Washington Times, and I want to walk through this, and then we're going to unpack this. So you can begin to ask the question, and the questions that I often ask about our K-12 public education system in the United States of America. It used to be the best in the world. In the world. Not anymore. We're about the middle of the pack worldwide in terms of education excellence. It's based on test scores. We test kids to find out, are they proficient? Are they learning? We test in math, English language arts, science, technology, your STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We test at the 4th and the 8th grade level because those are key moments in the timeline in terms of whether these students, these kids, we're talking K-12, they're kids, whether they're becoming proficient, whether they are learning. To put it simply, are they learning anything? So I come across this article, like I said, in Washington Times, and it says, red state governors raising teacher pay while waging battle against woke agendas in public schools. And again, leave the wokeness out of this. We'll talk about that in a different podcast. Hopefully you'll come back. So I'm going to read some excerpts from this article. It says, America's teachers are receiving significant pay raises from red state governors who are simultaneously bolstering parental rights in education, in some cases letting parents use their tax dollars for private schools. It's an unusual policy mix that gives Republican governors from Utah to Georgia a foothold on education issues that are popular with teachers. Quote, this is the most substantial overhaul of our state's education system in Arkansas history, and frankly, it couldn't come soon enough, said Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders in announcing this package in Little Rock in February. Mrs. Sanders announced her education proposal a little more than a week after Utah Republican Governor Spencer Cox signed a bill providing public school teachers with a $6,000 pay increase. The bill, Mr. Cox said, strikes a good balance by adequately funding public education while giving parents additional options to meet the needs of their families. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, notice it's red states. Red states. We know the Democrats have destroyed their schools in these blue states, in these urban centers, Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Detroit, among the worst in the nation. Their K-12 public school system. LA, you name it, St. Louis. So it says here, getting back to the story, in Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis has secured more than $2 billion in funding for teacher pay since 2020. $2 billion in funding for teacher pay. Mr. DeSantis' most recent education proposal seeks $200 million to raise teacher salaries, marking the third consecutive year he has addressed teacher compensation in his budget proposal. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp has provided teachers with a $5,000 pay increase during his first term in office. Re-elected in November by a margin of more than 7 points, Mr. Kemp is proposing an additional $2,000 pay hike in 2023 for public school teachers and additional funding to help increase the number of public school teachers. Back to Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Arkansas's newly minted Republican governor is the latest red state teacher to offer such a package, following in the footsteps of Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Utah, Iowa, and other states. This month, she announced a proposal to boost teacher annual minimum salaries from $36,000 to $50,000, a nearly 40% increase. The plan would also provide $2,000 pay raises to veteran teachers who are already earning $50,000 or more. So I read this article and I go, this is kind of odd. And it's odd because nowhere in this story, ladies and gentlemen, does the word achievement or the word merit appeal. Just handing out pay raises, and I say, for what? The goal should be excellence and learning. Now, we all know teachers. Most of us, neighbor, family member, we love teachers, right? And you rarely find people that have a bad word to say about teachers. And I'm not here to have bad words to say about it, but what I'm here to ask is, what are you accomplishing? Are the students learning? Not, is the teacher working hard? Teachers always whine. Yes, whine. We don't have enough money that reaches the classroom. You know why? Because most of the money spent on education is for salaries and benefits. It doesn't reach the classroom. And so what that means is, since the largest portion of the budget goes towards salaries and benefits, you better get something in return for that. So let's look at the costs of education in the United States of America. This is from Business Insider. The U.S. spends more on education than any other country, but students lag behind academically. Here's how much other countries spend and how well their students perform. The United States, ladies and gentlemen, spends over $700 billion a year on public education, yet it lags behind most other industrialized countries and key measurements of academic success. See, that's what I'm in search of, academic success. The article goes on to say that in 2017, the U.S. spent $12,800 per student on public education, which is the second highest amount spent per student of any country in the world. It goes on to say, but when it comes to total spending, the comparison isn't remotely close. According to data from the National Center for Education Statistics, the U.S. spent over $700 billion on public education in 2017 alone. To put that in perspective, you could add up the total GDP of Finland and Vietnam, and you still wouldn't hit the amount the U.S. spends on education. But despite all that spending, this article says the U.S. has struggled. Pew Research from 2017 found the U.S. ranked 38th in math and 24th in science when compared against 71 other countries. Only 2 decades prior, remember I said the last 30 years, only 2 decades prior, the U.S.'s education system ranked 6th internationally. Now we're 38th in math and 24th in science. And yet we're spending more money on education than we ever have. And that's what I mean when I say, what are we getting for this? So and what I'm trying to do is give you some research. I don't come on this podcast and just spew my opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. I form my positions after I do some research. What are other people saying about this? Other people who are smarter than me. I've known about this crisis in education for a very long time. And so what I'm doing now is I'm laying the groundwork to support my thesis, my argument. We're not getting a return on investment for all the money that we're paying for education in this country. Why do we continue to add more to it? Why do we keep giving teachers raises? Why do we keep spending more on education budgets? And the achievement doesn't keep up with it. The achievement, ladies and gentlemen, is not there. So here's another story from the American Legislative Exchange Council. The title, Education Spending is Increasing, but where is the money going? See, we got to ask that. Where the hell is this nearly $1 trillion in education spending going? Like I said, most of it, I understand that. Goes to salaries and benefits of teachers, but then the teachers better be coming up with something. These kids better be learning. So this article says, waste and inefficiency in public education spending has resulted in no link between increased spending and student achievement. I have known that for a very long time. The reason I have known it, I have read study after study after study that shows there is no correlation between how much you spend on education and academic achievement. No correlation. So whenever you hear somebody say, well, we need to spend more on education, you just say, why? You know what you'll get? Well, it's the right thing to do. Well, it's for our kids. Well, it's for the future. And then ask them, what are the test scores in the school district? How much have we increased spending over the last 25 years? And what has happened to the test scores? Are our kids learning? Those are the questions you ask at school budget time and in the state capitol. when they put these budgets, these education budgets that they share with the state school districts together. Ask a question. The researchers found some cities spent more per capita yet generated lower test scores. Then why do we continue to spend this money in this fashion? So here's from the Heritage Foundation. American spending on public K-12 education continues at an all-time high and is still rising. Again, from the Heritage Foundation, federal spending on elementary and secondary education has also increased dramatically. Here's the third bullet point from the Heritage Foundation. These are based on studies, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't somebody's opinion. Continuous spending increases have not corresponded with equal improvement in American educational performance. Let me take you back to that article I was reading about how the red state governors are raising teacher pay and spending more on education. And that's why I ask, why? Are the governors asking these questions? Have the governors looked at these test scores and this research and go, well, I'd like to spend more on education, but I want to get a little bit more out of it for the tax dollars spent? No, we just keep spending money. And then at election time, all the politicians, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, they run around their district saying, hey, I increased education spending. I voted to increase education spending. When I hear that, I say, why'd you do that? Well, because it's for our kids' future. Really? Are we getting a return on investment? Because the study that I have here shows blah, 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 blah. And then you get this blank stare, this deer in the headlights stare, because no one's ever confronted them like that before. We just spend money because it's the, quote, right thing to do. It's for our children's future. Our children aren't learning. You want evidence of that? You know, what we're getting for all this spending on education in the United States of America. One more. This is from the United States Census Bureau. It says public school spending per pupil increases by largest amount in 11 years. The article goes on to say the nation spent $752.3 billion on its 48 million children in public schools in fiscal year 2019, a 4.7% increase from the previous year, and the most per pupil spending in more than a decade. Now, here's something that I mentioned earlier. Instructional salaries, that's the teacher pay, the largest expenditure within current spending, totaled $239.9 billion in fiscal year 2019, or 31% of the total expenditures for public elementary secondary education. So what are we getting? Here's what we're getting. This is from Pew Research. U.S. student academic achievement still lags that of their peers in many other countries. How do U.S. students compare with their peers around the world? Recently released data from the International Math and Science Assessments indicates that United States students continue to rank around the middle of the pack and behind many other advanced industrialized nations. Ladies and gentlemen, we're average and below average. That's all we're getting. So it goes on to say, because, you know, this stuff's important in terms of why we're spending all this money in education and why there's not a demand for reform. We need reform of our education model here in the United States of America. Reform. We're working with an archaic model. These large urban school districts are archaic. Not only that, the school year, this, summer vacation, 3 months off, is hurting the continuance of learning. By the time the kids come back in September, there's a lag time to catch up on what was happening before school let out in May or June. Do you know why we have that model? It was when the United States was an agricultural society and the kids were needed at home to help the parents' farms. We were an agricultural-based society. That's the growing season. The kids helped in the fields. That's why we let them off for 3 months in the summer. Why are we still on that model? We are no longer an agricultural-based society. These kids aren't working on farms. They're not helping mom and dad till and plant and harvest. Nobody ever brings this up. Nobody ever mentions it. Why do we give these kids 3 months off? They need some time off. You need a break in some of this stuff. I like the school districts that have gone to trimester. All right, you want to go for 3-4 months and take 2 weeks off? That's fine. School buildings are air conditioned now. They weren't 100 years ago. Sitting in a classroom had to be hell. And you know who that is really hurting? Black and Hispanic kids. The gap, the education gap between Black and Hispanic kids' test scores and whites is widening. They're falling further behind. And yet there doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency. So like I said, we're in the tech age now. And that 3-month gap for summer is hurting these kids. They start the school year and it takes, a month or so to catch up. Yet we just keep plugging along. You know why? The teachers like it. They like the summers off. If you raise the idea of all year school, and that doesn't mean 365 days. I said they need, some time here. You want to let them off 2 weeks in the winter for Christmas? You want to let them off 2 or even 3, even a month in the summer? That wouldn't hurt. But if you raise that idea to a teacher, those teachers would go wild. They'd be running around like their hair's on fire. What do you mean? I have to work during the summer. Well, you got into the profession. You wanted to be a teacher. This isn't about you. This is what they need to be told, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't about you. I thought it was about the kids. Remind them.
The country is under attack from within like never before. Bulldog TV and its community is leading the way to an open and honest media. Join Bulldog TV today by following Bulldog TV on Facebook and Truth Social.
You talk about race, crime, and politics. Some folks lose sleep over this, but not me, because I sleep just fine on my Giza Dream Sheets and pillow from MyPillow, especially this new 2.0. If you haven't gotten yours yet, you are missing out. Just go to mypillow.com and use promo code Clark, that's CLARKE, and save up to 66% off. The direct link is also available on my website, americasheriff.com. Get a great night's sleep so we can continue the fight. So here again from Pew Research, how the U.S. compares on science, math, and reading scores. In science, we are like 19th. Let me read for effect, because if I just tell you there's like 19 other countries ahead of us in terms of test scores, science, math, and reading, if I just say 19, it doesn't really hit home. Listen to some of these countries, and by the way, most of them are not spending as much per pupil as we are. You know who leads the pack in science? Go ahead and take a guess. The answer is Singapore. You know who's next? Japan, Estonia, Taiwan, Finland, Macau, Canada, Vietnam, Hong Kong, South Korea. Notice these Asian nations? Slovenia, New Zealand, Australia, Germany, Netherlands, United Kingdom, Switzerland, Ireland, Denmark, Belgium, Poland, Portugal, Norway, and then the United States of America. That's just in science. It's worse in math, how the U.S. compares on science, math, and reading scores. Mathematics, you know who's number one? Hint. The same country that's number one in science. Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan. Do you notice the same countries? Japan, South Korea, Switzerland, Estonia, Canada, Netherlands, Finland, Denmark, Slovenia, Belgium, Germany, Ireland, Poland, Norway, Austria, New Zealand. Yeah, I got a few to go here before I get to the United States, folks. Vietnam, Australia, Sweden, Russia, France, United Kingdom, Portugal, Czech Republic, Italy, Iceland, Spain, Luxembourg, Latvia, Malta, Lithuania, Hungary, Slovakia, and then the United States of America in math. We're worse in math than we are in science in terms of these ranks worldwide. So now let's look at what we're getting for reading. Guess who's number one? Hint, the same country that was number one in science and in math, Singapore. Guess who's number 2? Hong Kong. This is reading. Finland, Ireland, Estonia, South Korea. See, the same countries. Japan, Norway, Macau, Germany, New Zealand, Poland, Slovenia, the Netherlands, Australia, Denmark, Sweden, Belgium, France, United Kingdom, Portugal, Taiwan, and then the United States of America. I wanted to read all those countries off for a fact. They're outdoing the United States education system, yet we spend more money than most of those countries. And by the way, most of those countries don't get 3 months off in the summer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I understand that there are other elements and variables that affect school learning, and a big one is parental involvement. The more parental involvement you have in schools, the more successful the kid is. And that's why in your Black and Hispanic schools, you don't have as much parental involvement, because if the parent doesn't care, the child won't care. So that's why you have that achievement gap in part. And there's some other things too. Like I said, I could spend the next 5 podcasts talking about this stuff and why it's happening. But like I said, you can't get a national discussion on it. You can't get anybody to talk about it. You don't get any hearings in Congress and in the state legislature on why our kids aren't learning. People say they care. Well, it's about the kids. They don't care. Because if they cared, they would talk about it like I am. They'd say, this is hot garbage. These scores, these test scores, these results, academic achievement, the word and merit, the words that did not appear in that first story I read about red state governors increasing teacher pay. Not once in that article did the word achievement, accomplishment, results, or merit come up. Because it's not about that. It's just about spending. So here's from the nationsreportcard.gov. You know, the Nations Report Card, they're the ones that test the kids, 4th and 8th grade. So according to this report from the Nations Report Card, NAEPT, I take the back, NAEP, the latest release, this is 2022, mathematics and reading report cards at grades 4 and 8. This is back into the United States now, compared to 2019 before the pandemic. So, and we'll get into that in a little bit, the pandemic, because that's used as an excuse. Well, the pandemic, virtual schooling, and they fell behind. And the pandemic isn't why our kids aren't learning. That may have aggravated an already bad situation. There's no doubt about that. But it didn't cause this. This was already happening. That just put it on steroids for a little while. So according to the 2022 Math and Reading Report Cards, grade 4 and 8, compared to 2019, average scores declined in both subjects and grades. Average scores declined for most states in both subjects and grades. Students' confidence in their mathematics and reading skills declined. This is what we're getting for increased spending on education here in the United States of America. And we just keep spending. We just keep adding to it. These governors, red state governors, trying to curry favor with the teachers union, who hates their guts anyway, who won't vote for them. Our K-12 public education system in the United States is teacher-centric instead of student-centric. It's all about the teachers. Here's another one. This is from Pew Research again. U.S. students' academic achievement still lags that of their peers in many other countries. How do U.S. students compare with their peers around the world? Recently released data from the International Math and Science Assessments indicates that U.S. students continue to rank around the middle of the pack. The middle of the pack. Here's a story from the Washington Times. Ladies and gentlemen, this is data. Data that can help determine if we're getting a bang for our buck in education spending. Are our kids learning? So this story says roughly half of public school students started the year behind their grade level, administrators say. About half of K-12 public school students started this fall behind their grade level in at least one subject, most commonly reading or math, according to new federal data released Thursday. That's why I said this summer off crap is hurting kids. I'm sure the kids like it. Summer vacation, I remember it was fun. But hell, that was when I was going to K-12 public education, students were learning. Remember, it said 25, 30 years ago, we were, about number 6 in the world nationally. And now we're 38th and 24th in math, 38th in science, 24th in reading. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, this is hot garbage. And we seem to be okay with this. And if you're not okay with it, what are you doing about it? I'm at least sounding the alarm. So here's one from the site, thecollegefix.com. Now keep in mind, this is K-12, public education in America. Headline says 2/3 of North Carolina 8th graders can't read proficiently. Teacher prep programs don't make the grade. 2/3, ladies and gentlemen. It says here only 36% of 4th graders, 36% of 4th graders in North Carolina and just 33% of 8th graders can read at a proficient or better level, according to the 2019 NAEP, the nation's report card. 33% of 4th graders rank in the below basic for reading, according to the NAEP report. Nearly 40% of these kids can't read. We're talking reading. And it's really no better in math, science. The fastest growing job sectors in the United States of America are healthcare, biotechnology, and microelectronics. Tech-based. You got to know math. You have to be able to read if you're going to compete for those jobs, and those are the higher paying jobs. You want to get out of poverty? How come we're not pushing more of these kids toward these STEM courses? Yeah, they may struggle at first. That's okay. They all learn at different rates. That's another thing. Social promotion, we just pass them on to the next grade. In Milwaukee, 90% of the kids graduate with a high school diploma. 90%, but they can't read. They can't subtract a 2-digit number from a 3-digit number and come up with the right answer. We're not talking about algebraic equations and stuff in these testings. This is basic stuff. I don't understand why people aren't as incensed as I am about this. Hot garbage. Nearly $1 trillion a year in education spending for this? Yet what are they working on in Congress and in our state legislatures? Police reform. Police reform. Leave the police the hell alone. What we need in the United States of America and in all 50 states is education reform. Drastic education reform. Not dancing around the edges. Not more money, because that's the first thing that comes up. Well, we just had more money. I just took you through research that shows spending more money does not equate to an increase in student achievement. That's why every time I hear somebody say, well, we don't have enough resources, teachers, I want to slap them. I said I want to. I didn't say I would. It's not about spending. We need a new model. We already know, and this is over the last 30 years. This didn't just start. I mentioned, I said, people want to blame the pandemic. Well, first of all, like I said, this happened well before the pandemic set in. But, that's a convenient excuse. Let me read you some stuff about the pandemic. This is again from the Washington Times. According to the Department of Education, some of this year's high school juniors and seniors missed entire semesters during the peak of the pandemic-induced school closures. Many school districts relaxed attendance requirements and other standards to advance those students with their classmates. Social promotion, that should be criminal because you're lying, using federal money. You're claiming these kids are learning and they're not. That's fraud. It goes on to say those efforts did not decrease the number of students falling behind in the annual survey from the end of 2021 to the end of 22, and parental rights advocates, say political clashes over racism lessons and transgender access to campus facilities did not help. Like I said, that's a discussion for another day. That's not why our kids aren't learning. That is aggravating the problem, but our kids haven't been learning well before CRT and some of this other garbage, this transgender garbage being forced down our kids' throats. So it says every level of leadership in the school system is distracted from academics, said Sherry Few, president of the United States Parents Involved in Education. Government schools are so utterly focused on sexualizing children and indoctrinating them against their country and each other that real academic learning is clearly not the priority. Yeah, I knew that. This thing goes on to say, policymakers, this is key, policymakers from both parties who valued currying political favor with the teachers' unions. You see what I mean? They're trying to curry political favor with teachers' unions. They value that over having functional schools and following scientific data. Share the blame for closing schools, said Dr. Azalja, a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Listen to this. This is a quote from him. In the U.S., schools were the first to close and the last to open during the pandemic. That's the opposite. This is from him. That's the opposite of what the paradigm should have been, said Dr. Adalja, an infectious disease specialist. The policymakers behind these decisions should be held accountable for what they wrought. We did this to these kids. And I know we were scared into doing it, right? It was the politics of fear going, oh, these kids are going to die. The kids had the lowest rates of catching COVID or dying from it. Yeah, but Dr. Fauci said close the schools. The hell with Dr. Fauci. He's the one that this doctor here is talking about, Tony Fauci. You know, when he says, in the U.S., schools were the first to close and the last to open. That is the opposite of what the paradigm should have been, said Dr. Adalja. The policymakers behind these decisions, that would be Fauci, should be held accountable for what they wrought, and they never will be. So now we lost all of this time in an academic school year for 2 years. And then who was it that fought to keep the schools closed, the buildings closed, and stay with virtual learning? The teachers' unions. Yeah, it was them. So we need a new model. This is so messed up. It's going to be like untangling fishing line. You know, you get a ball of fishing line. You first got to find out where the beginning of it is. If you're going to untangle it, you can't untangle it pulling from the middle or from the ball of jumbled line. This is going to be hard stuff, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be heavy lifting. But if we really care about these kids and the future of the country, what we're doing is we're building a generation of gas station workers and grocery store clerks. And I'm not demeaning that. Those are good starter jobs. I started working at Burger King, for heaven's sakes, when I was 16, but I certainly knew I wasn't going to end up there. And my parents made damn sure that I'd be educated enough to get out of that situation. If we want to get people out of poverty, let's teach them in core competencies that matter. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's what they need to compete. We're falling behind the rest of the world. So ask yourself, do you care? No, really, do you care? Attention, Patriots. Looking for a great book? Let me recommend The Greatest Story Ever Told. The We the People Bible is available for the first time in history. This Bible is for those who believe it is time to give America back to God. Faith is being targeted, and our country's founding beliefs are being targeted. The We the People Bible is restoring what there is an attempt to remove: the preservation of faith and the preservation of America. One of the most unique features of this Bible is that it includes the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and the Pledge of Allegiance as a bonus. This makes it a perfect heirloom to pass on to the generations to come. It is time to give America back to God, and this Bible is a great way to do just that. Get one for yourself and another as a gift for a friend or family member. Go to americasheriff.com and click on the Bible link to order today while supplies last. Friends, I want to thank you for listening to today's episode of Straight Talk with yours truly, America's Sheriff David Clark. And a special thank you also goes out to our sponsors. My goal, as always, is to break down these complex and many times controversial issues and bring it to you straight with a little dose of common sense, no media bias, no talking points, just truth. And this podcast would not be possible without your support. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite place to listen. And please share this message of common sense on social media. For more content, be sure to follow me on Truth Social, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And just a reminder, we'd love for you to join our Straight Shooters VIP Podcast Club for only $5 per month. And with that membership, you'll receive invitations to attend private podcast events throughout the year as a VIP guest when we come to your town. Plus, if you join today, you'll also receive a free coffee mug and a sample of our private label coffee as long as supplies last. Subscribe and join at AmericasSheriff.com. This podcast is brought to you by AmericasSheriff.com with executive producer Judy Wilkinson of JLWilkinsonConsulting and producer Josh Wentz in partnership with our friends at Bulldog Media. If you are interested in partnering with Straight Talk Podcasts or having me speak in your area, please contact Judy at JLWilkinsonConsulting@gmail.com, 706-518-2116. That's JLWilkinsonConsulting@gmail.com. Phone number 706-518-2116. Stay tuned. Great things are coming on next week's podcast. Remember, I'm trying to make the case for abolishing the FBI, not reforming it, not fixing it, not replacing a few people at the top, abolishing it. That is a very strong word. When you start talking about a federal bureaucracy, abolishing it, disbanding it, unplugging it.